The first thing I saw was my husband's face. The second was the woman standing beside him. And then someone behind the camera shouted, "Congratulations to the happy couple." I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, still wearing the wedding ring Daniel had given me 14 years earlier. I watched the Facebook Live in silence. Daniel was smiling. He was wearing the navy suit I had bought him for our anniversary. The woman beside him was wearing a black dress, and on her left hand was a diamond ring. The man holding the phone turned toward her. "Mrs. Bennett, how does it feel?" She laughed. Daniel put his hand around her waist. Then he kissed her forehead. I couldn't breathe. Because Daniel was supposed to be 300 miles away at a business conference. He had called me that morning from his hotel. He had complained about the coffee. He had told me his meetings were running late. He had promised he would be home Saturday night. Instead, on Friday afternoon, I was watching my husband get engaged to another woman in front of more than 200 people. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't even cry. I just watched. Because something about the way Daniel looked at her frightened me. It wasn't the expression of a man caught in a mistake. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't hesitation. It was happiness. Real happiness. The kind I hadn't seen on his face in years. Then the woman leaned toward him and whispered something. Daniel smiled. The microphone caught his answer. "After everything we've been through, we finally get to be together." I replayed it. Once, twice, 3 times. My hands started shaking. Because if Daniel believed they had finally gotten together, then this hadn't started that week. It hadn't started on that business trip. It had been happening long before I knew. And suddenly, every business trip, every late meeting, every weekend he had spent away from home, seemed to take on a different meaning. I looked at the woman again. Her name was Claire Bennett. I knew that name. I had heard it once before. 6 months earlier, Daniel had accidentally called me Claire. When I asked who she was, he smiled and said she was someone from the office. I believed him. That was the part that hurt most. Not that Daniel had another woman. Not even that he had lied. It was that I had spent 14 years believing I knew the man sitting across from me at breakfast every morning. And within the next 72 hours, I would discover that Daniel had spent years building a second life behind my back. A second home. A second bank account. A second family. And a plan for what would happen to everything we had built together. The Facebook Live wasn't the beginning of my husband's betrayal. It was simply the first time he forgot to hide it. 14 years is a long time to be married to someone. Long enough to know how they take their coffee. Long enough to recognize their footsteps before they reach the front door. Long enough to know the difference between their tired silence and their angry silence. Long enough to believe you can tell when they're lying. At least, that's what I thought. Daniel and I met when I was 31. He was 34. He worked in commercial real estate. I managed operations for a medical supply company. We met at a friend's dinner party, talked until almost midnight, and exchanged numbers without either of us expecting anything serious. 3 months later, he had a toothbrush in my apartment. 8 months after that, he proposed. A year later, we were married. Our marriage wasn't perfect. I won't pretend it was. We argued about money. We disagreed about parenting. There were nights when one of us went to bed angry. There were months when work consumed both of us. But there was something underneath all of it that I believed was solid. Trust. We had a daughter, Sophie. She was 12. She had Daniel's smile and my stubbornness. We lived in a comfortable house outside Chicago. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't the kind of house people photographed for magazines. But it was ours. Every room carried a piece of our history. The scratch on the hallway wall from when Sophie learned to ride her bicycle. The dent in the kitchen floor from the Christmas tree stand. The faded mark on the dining table where Daniel had once spilled red wine during our 10th anniversary dinner. Those things meant something to me. They were proof that we had built a life together. Daniel traveled several times a year for work. Atlanta, Dallas, Denver, Phoenix, sometimes New York. I never worried about the trips. He usually called every night, sometimes twice. He always came home with something for Sophie. A bracelet, A stuffed animal. A box of candy. For me, usually chocolate. He knew exactly which kind I liked. That was why I never questioned him. Then, about 8 months before the Facebook Live, things started changing. Not dramatically. That would have been easier. The trips simply became more frequent. A 2-day conference became 4 days. A business dinner became a weekend. A meeting that should have ended at 6 suddenly lasted until midnight. Whenever I asked, Daniel had an explanation ready. Clients. Regional team. Contract negotiations. Networking. Everything sounded reasonable. That was the problem. Nothing was outrageous enough to make me suspicious. There were no lipstick stains. No hotel receipts accidentally left on the counter. No mysterious phone calls at 3 in the morning. Daniel was careful. Very careful. And because he was careful, I trusted him more. Then one Friday night, he came home from Dallas. He walked through the front door carrying his suitcase. I ran toward him. He hugged me. He smelled like the hotel soap he always complained about. "You're home," I said. "Miss me?" "Obviously." He kissed my forehead. Then he said something that didn't register until later. "It's good to be home." I smiled. "Where else would you rather be?" He looked at me for half a second too long. Then he laughed. "Nowhere." 6 months later, I would remember that pause. I would remember everything. But at the time, I didn't think anything of it. The first real warning came 3 weeks later. Daniel was standing in the kitchen, checking his phone. I was making coffee. He looked up. "Claire says the meeting got moved." I turned. "Who?" He froze. "Claire." I smiled. "The woman from your office?" "Yeah. That's her name." He nodded. "Right." I laughed. "Why are you acting weird?" "I'm not." He kissed my cheek. Then he walked away. I didn't think about Claire again. Not until she appeared beside my husband on Facebook Live. Wearing a diamond ring. I didn't sleep that night. I replayed the live stream until my phone battery died. Then I plugged it in and watched it again. Claire was beautiful. Late 30s. Dark blonde hair. Elegant black dress. She carried herself like someone who was comfortable around Daniel. Too comfortable. She knew his habits. She knew when he was nervous. When someone made a joke, she looked at Daniel before she laughed. When he reached for his glass, she moved it closer to him. When he spoke, she watched his face. Those tiny things bothered me more than the engagement ring. Because they weren't the actions of strangers. They belonged to people who had spent years learning each other. I went to Claire's Facebook page. It was public. At first, I found ordinary photographs. Dinner with friends. Family birthdays. A beach trip. Pictures of flowers. Then I found Daniel. One photograph. Then another. Then another. Daniel at a restaurant. Daniel standing beside Claire beside a Christmas tree. Daniel holding her hand. Daniel sitting at a kitchen table. I stared at the screen. The dates were worse than the photographs. The earliest picture I could find was almost 8 years old. 8 years. I zoomed in. Daniel was younger. Claire was standing beside him. And neither of them looked like co-workers. They looked like a couple. I kept scrolling. Then I found a photograph from 3 weeks earlier. Daniel was standing outside a house. He was holding a set of keys. The caption read, "Finally home." I zoomed in. Christmas lights were wrapped around the porch. There was a child's bicycle beside the garage. A baseball glove sat near the front door. And Daniel was smiling. I checked the date. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had told me he was in Denver. He wasn't in Denver. He was standing outside another woman's house. I kept scrolling. Then I saw the photograph that made my stomach drop. Claire was sitting at a kitchen table. Daniel's hand was visible beside hers. 2 coffee cups were between them. And behind them was a framed photograph. I zoomed in. Daniel. Claire. And a little boy. The caption said, "Our little family." This time, I cried. Not because Daniel had another woman. Because apparently, he had another family. I wanted to call Daniel immediately. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask Claire why she had the audacity to wear my husband's ring. But something stopped me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe some part of me understood that if I confronted Daniel too soon, he would have time to destroy whatever evidence remained. So I did something I had never done in 14 years of marriage. I investigated my husband. I started with our joint account. At first, everything looked normal. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, school expenses, insurance. Then I noticed a recurring payment. A storage unit. I stared at it. Daniel had never mentioned a storage unit. I wrote down the address. Then I found another recurring charge. A second phone line. Then another. A property tax payment. Different address. Different county. I copied it. My hands were shaking. I searched the address. It was the house from Claire's Facebook photographs. Daniel owned another house. I sat there for several minutes. Then I checked the purchase date. 4 years earlier. I thought about that. 4 years. 4 years before the engagement. 4 years before the live stream. 4 years before I knew Claire existed. I opened the mortgage records. The property was not entirely financed through the account I knew. There were transfers from another account. An account with Daniel's name. But I had never seen it. I checked the bank. The account had existed for almost 8 years. 8 years. The same amount of time Claire said they had been together. I felt something inside me go cold. I kept going. There were restaurant charges, hotel bills, furniture purchases, home renovations, and then I saw a charge from a pediatrician's office. I stared at it. A child. The little boy. Ethan. I knew his name from Claire's Facebook page. Daniel wasn't simply sleeping with another woman. He was paying for another family. Then I noticed something else. School tuition. The payment had been made 6 years earlier. That was when the story changed for me. Because Ethan wasn't some recent accident Daniel was hiding. He had been supporting this child for years. While I was paying Sophie's school fees, Daniel was paying Ethan's. While I was buying groceries for our house, Daniel was buying furniture for another one. While I thought my husband was working late, he was building a second life. But I still didn't know why. And I wasn't ready for the answer. Ethan was 7. I learned that from Claire's Facebook page. He played baseball. He took piano lessons. He had Daniel's smile. That was the part I couldn't get out of my head. Daniel's smile. I had watched that smile on Sophie since the day she was born. Now I was looking at it on another child. I sat in my car outside the second house. I had found the address. I hadn't planned to go there. I told myself I only wanted to see whether it was real. It was. 2-story brick house. White garage. Blue shutters. The same Christmas lights from the photograph were still hanging beneath the roofline even though Christmas was months away. I stayed in the car. Then the front door opened. Claire stepped outside. Ethan followed. A few seconds later, Daniel came out carrying a baseball bag. I stopped breathing. He bent down. Ethan ran into his arms. Daniel lifted him. The boy laughed. Daniel kissed the side of his head. I watched through the windshield. That was the first time I saw my husband as a father to another child. Not in a photograph. Not on a bank statement. In real life. And suddenly, the money didn't matter. The house didn't matter. The engagement didn't matter. That child did. Because Ethan had done nothing wrong. He hadn't asked to become part of Daniel's secret. Neither had Sophie. I drove home without getting out of the car. That night, Daniel called. "Hey, sweetheart." I closed my eyes. "Hey, how was your day?" I almost told him. I almost said, "I saw you." Instead, I said, "Fine." He continued talking about his conference. About the hotel. About a client who was difficult. I listened. And for the first time in 14 years, I knew with absolute certainty that my husband was lying to me. But I also realized something else. If Daniel had been able to maintain this life for 8 years, he wasn't going to tell me the truth because I asked nicely. I needed to know what he was protecting. I contacted Claire. Not through Facebook. Through an email address I found on her business website. I wrote only one sentence. "I know about Daniel." She replied 17 minutes later. Then you know he told me you were separated. I stared at the message. Separated? I wrote back. We are not separated. Her response came almost immediately. I know that now. I didn't understand. Then she wrote, I thought you knew. That sentence made me angry. I called her. She answered. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she said, I'm sorry. Were you aware he was married? Yes. My heart sank. So you knew. I knew he said the marriage was ending. You knew he was married. Yes. And you stayed. Silence. Yes. At least she didn't lie. That made me angrier. How long? 8 years. I closed my eyes. Did he ever tell you he loved me? She hesitated. Yes. When? All the time. I laughed bitterly. And you believed him? I believed he was going to leave. When? He said when Sophie was older. My stomach tightened. How old? 18. I looked at the wall. Sophie was 12. 6 more years. Daniel had apparently planned to keep both lives for another 6 years. Then Claire said something that made me stop. He told me something else. What? He said he needed to make sure you were financially secure before he left. I laughed. Financially secure? Yes. That doesn't make sense. I know. Did he explain? He said you depended on the house. I went quiet. Because I didn't depend on the house. But Daniel had been asking me to refinance it. For months. I asked Claire. What exactly did he tell you? She hesitated. Then said. He said once the house was refinanced, everything would be easier. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly what that meant. The house wasn't just a home anymore. It was an asset. And Daniel was moving pieces around it. That night, I waited until Daniel was asleep. Then I went into his office. His laptop was locked. His desk drawer wasn't. Inside were property documents, insurance papers, bank statements, and a folder with my name on it. I opened it. The first page was a refinancing proposal. The second was an asset summary. The third made my hands go numb. A company I had never heard of. I searched the name. It was connected to the second property, but not just the second property. 3 others. I opened another document. There was a list of assets. Some were in Daniel's name, others were under companies. I stared at the dates. Most had been acquired over the previous 8 years. I took photographs of every page. Then, I heard footsteps upstairs. I froze. Daniel. I closed the drawer, turned off the light, and slipped into the hallway. He walked toward the office. I stood behind the corner. He entered. I watched through the gap. He opened the drawer. He looked inside. Then he stopped. He didn't touch anything. He simply stared. After several seconds, he closed the drawer. He stood there, thinking. Then he walked away. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Only then did I breathe. Daniel knew. He didn't know what I had seen. But he knew something had changed, and that meant I had to move faster. 3 days later, Daniel came home early. He walked through the door carrying his suitcase. Hey, sweetheart. I looked at him. Hey. He kissed my forehead. You okay? Fine. He smiled. Missed you. I almost laughed. He had no idea. Or perhaps he did. He went upstairs. I waited until I heard the shower. Then I opened the drawer again. This time, I found something different. A life insurance policy. $1 million. Claire was the primary beneficiary. I stared at the page. Then I found a will. Daniel had changed it 3 years earlier. Sophie was included. I was barely mentioned. Claire and Ethan received a substantial portion. I sat down. My hands were shaking. Then I noticed something at the bottom of the document. A trust. The Bennett Family Trust. I had seen that name before. I opened the attached papers. The trust had been created 7 years earlier. Not 4. Not 3. 7. Before the second house. Before the engagement. Before Daniel ever admitted Claire existed. I read the beneficiaries. Ethan, Claire, and Daniel. Then I found the clause that changed everything. The trust would not fully transfer to Claire until Daniel was no longer legally married. I stared at the sentence. Suddenly, the engagement made sense. Daniel didn't just want to marry Claire. He needed to be legally free to activate the financial structure he had built around his second family. But there was still one question. Why had he waited 8 years? Then I remembered what Claire had told me. He said once the house was refinanced, everything would be easier. The answer was sitting in front of me. Daniel wasn't preparing to leave me. He was preparing to make sure leaving me didn't cost him what he wanted. And I had almost helped him. The next morning, Daniel placed the papers in front of me. Good news. I looked at him. What? The refinance came through. I stared at the documents. He smiled. We'll save money every month. I picked up the papers. Why does this company appear here? His smile disappeared. What company? I pointed. This one. He took the papers. It's just part of the lender's structure. Why is it connected to the property in Indiana? He froze. Only for a second. But I saw it. What property? I looked directly at him. The one you own with Claire. Silence. His face changed. The performance was over. He sat down. Nora. I waited. I can explain. I nodded. Then explain. He rubbed his hands together. Claire and I have been together for a while. How long? He didn't answer. How long, Daniel? 8 years. The number landed like a physical blow. 8 years. I whispered. You've been cheating on me for 8 years? It wasn't like that. What was it like? We were separated. We were never separated. I mean emotionally. I laughed. You were emotionally separated from me while sleeping beside me? He looked away. Then I asked the question I already knew the answer to. Is Ethan your son? Daniel closed his eyes. Yes. Everything became quiet. 14 years of marriage. 8 years of an affair. 7-year-old son. Another house. Another woman. And a financial plan I had unknowingly been helping him build. I asked, Does Claire know you're still married? Yes. Does Ethan know about me? He didn't answer. That was enough. Then I asked the question that made Daniel look up. Were you ever planning to tell me? He hesitated. Yes. When? When Sophie was older. How old? 18. I stared at him. You were going to lie to me for another 6 years. I was trying to protect her. No. I shook my head. You were protecting yourself. 2 days later, Claire called me. Her voice sounded different. Something's wrong. What happened? I found another document. I met her. She placed it on the table. I didn't know about this. It was a trust agreement. I read it. Then looked at her. You weren't supposed to know about this either? No. What does it say? She pointed to the final page. Daniel had created restrictions on the trust. Claire couldn't access most of the money unless certain conditions were met. One condition required Daniel to be legally divorced. Another required the sale or transfer of several properties. But there was something else. A clause concerning our house. If the property were refinanced under the proposed structure, a portion of the equity could be redirected through one of Daniel's companies. I looked at Claire. He was going to use my house to finance yours. She started crying. I didn't know. I believe you. She looked at me. Do you hate me? I thought about the Facebook Live, the ring, the kiss, the photographs. Then I thought about Ethan. I don't know. She nodded. I understand. I folded the document. Then I asked, Did Daniel ever tell you why he couldn't leave me? She wiped her eyes. He said you were the only person who knew everything about him. I frowned. What does that mean? I don't know. Then she reached into her purse. There was one more thing. She placed her phone on the table. A recording. Daniel's voice. I just need her to trust me a little longer. Claire's voice answered. You've been saying that for years. Daniel replied. I know. Then what are you waiting for? A pause. Then Daniel said, I need the house first. I stared at the phone. That was the moment I understood. The affair wasn't the whole story. Claire wasn't the whole story. The second family wasn't the whole story. The house was, and Daniel had been preparing to take part of it long before I knew there was anything to lose. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had watched Daniel get engaged. I looked around the room, 14 years of memories, and suddenly, I wondered how many of them had been real. The family dinners, the anniversaries, the vacations. The nights he held me while we watched television. Had he been thinking about Claire? Had he been planning the second house while I was planning our next vacation? Had he been sitting beside me at Christmas while secretly deciding what belonged to another woman? I didn't know, and I realized I never would. Because the most painful thing about betrayal isn't discovering what someone did. It's realizing you'll never know how much of your past was true. The next morning, I called an attorney. I took every document, every photograph, every bank statement, every message, every recording. She looked through them. Then she said something that changed the direction of everything. Nora, you need to stop thinking about saving your marriage. I looked at her. Why? Because your husband isn't preparing for a divorce. What is he preparing for? She closed the folder. A disappearance. I didn't understand. She explained. He has been moving assets into structures that make them harder to trace. He's created separate accounts. He's transferred property. He's created a trust. He's changed beneficiaries. She looked at me. He isn't just preparing to leave. He's preparing to leave with as much as possible. I felt sick. How much? She looked at the documents. Enough that if you hadn't found this now, you could have spent years fighting to recover what was already yours. I thought about the refinance papers, the ones I had almost signed, the ones Daniel had called a favor to our family. I suddenly understood why he had been so patient. He didn't need to force me. He only needed me to trust him, and I almost did. Daniel knew I had hired an attorney. He didn't ask how I knew. He didn't need to. He came home that evening and placed his keys on the counter. We need to talk. I looked at him. Yes. He sat down. I know you've been investigating me. I've been investigating my own finances. You went through my office. I went through documents with my name on them. He sighed. Nora, this doesn't have to become ugly. I stared at him. You keep using that word. What word? Ugly. He looked confused. You've spent 8 years lying to me. I made mistakes. No. I shook my head. Mistakes happen once. Silence. You made decisions. His jaw tightened. I loved Claire. I believe you. He looked surprised. But you also loved me. Yes. And you wanted Sophie. Yes. And Ethan. Yes. I nodded. That was your problem. He frowned. You wanted everyone. He looked away. I didn't know how to choose. You didn't have to choose. I pointed toward the documents. You could have told the truth. I was afraid. Of what? Losing everything. I stared at him. Then I understood. You weren't afraid of losing me. He said nothing. You were afraid of losing the life I helped you build. His eyes filled with tears. Nora. No. I stood. You don't get to cry now. He looked at me. I loved you. I believed him. That was the cruelest part. Maybe Daniel had loved me. Maybe he had loved Claire. Maybe he had loved both of us in different ways. But love without honesty had become something else. Possession. Convenience. Control. He wanted me to remain his wife while another woman waited for him to become her husband. And he wanted me to help finance the transition. That wasn't love. That was entitlement. I thought I knew everything. I didn't. The final discovery came from a document Daniel had forgotten to remove from an old email account. It was dated 7 years earlier. The subject line read, Contingency Plan. I opened it. There were notes. Property, accounts, insurance, trust, divorce, and one sentence that made me sit completely still. If Nora discovers the relationship before the assets are secured, delay, deny, and make her question the timeline. I read it again. Then again. He had planned for the possibility that I would find out. He had anticipated my suspicion. He had even planned what he would say. I kept reading. The document described the story he intended to tell, that our marriage had been emotionally over, that Claire had entered his life after our relationship had already collapsed, that the financial transfers were for Ethan, that the properties were investments, that the refinance was for our benefit. He had prepared a narrative, not just a lie, a defense, and suddenly, I understood why he had always been so calm. He wasn't improvising. He had rehearsed. I closed the laptop. For the first time since the Facebook Live, I wasn't angry. I was clear. Daniel had spent 8 years preparing for the day I would discover him. He just hadn't expected me to discover him before he was ready. 3 weeks later, Claire called me. They're still having the party. I knew what she meant. The engagement celebration. Daniel had decided to continue with it, even after everything. I asked, why? Claire answered, he says canceling it would make people suspicious. I almost laughed. Even now, even after everything. He was still managing appearances. I went. Not to create a scene. Not to embarrass him. I went because I wanted to see the man who had spent 8 years living a life he thought he could control. The room was full. Friends, family, business associates, people who knew nothing. Claire stood near the center. She wasn't wearing the diamond ring. Daniel stood beside her. Then he saw me. His face went white. The room slowly became quiet. I walked toward him. He whispered, "Nora." I stopped. "Congratulations." He looked at Claire, then back at me. "Please don't do this here." I smiled. "I'm not doing anything." I reached into my purse. I placed an envelope on the table. "What is that?" "Your divorce papers." He stared at me. Then I placed a second envelope beside it. "Copies of the financial records." His expression changed. "You wouldn't." "I already did." He stepped toward me. "Nora, please." I shook my head. "No." Then I looked at Claire. She was crying. I looked at Ethan. He was standing beside his grandmother, completely unaware of the adult world collapsing around him. And I realized something. None of this was his fault. None of it was Sophie's fault. They were the children adults had failed. So I turned back to Daniel. "You spent 8 years building this life." He couldn't speak. I continued. "You lied to me." Silence. "You lied to Claire." Silence. "You lied to Sophie." His eyes filled with tears. "And you lied to yourself." He looked at me. I took off my wedding ring. I placed it on the table. "You finally got what you wanted." Then I walked away. This time, I didn't look back. The divorce took 11 months. There were lawyers, financial investigations, bank records, property records, documents Daniel thought no one would ever find. The story he had rehearsed for years began falling apart. The money could be traced. The properties could be traced. The trust could be examined. The refinance never happened. And the assets Daniel had spent years moving became part of the legal battle he had tried so hard to avoid. Claire eventually ended their relationship, not because she suddenly stopped loving him, but because she finally understood something. Daniel hadn't built a second life because he was brave enough to leave his marriage. He had built it because he was afraid to lose control. He wanted Claire without losing me. He wanted Ethan without disrupting Sophie. He wanted another house without giving up ours. He wanted another future without surrendering the past. He wanted everything, and he believed he could keep everything if he lied carefully enough. He was wrong. Sophie was the hardest part. I didn't tell her every detail. Children don't need to carry the weight of their parents' betrayal. I simply told her that her father and I were getting divorced. That sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, and that none of it was her fault. Months later, she asked me something I will never forget. "Mom, did Dad ever love you?" I sat beside her. "Yes." She looked confused. "Then why did he do it?" I thought about Daniel, about Claire, about Ethan, about the trust, the second house, the bank accounts, the Facebook Live, and I finally had an answer. Because loving someone doesn't automatically make a person honest. She looked at me. "And sometimes," I continued, "people love you and still make selfish choices." She nodded slowly. Then she took my hand. I squeezed it. A year after the live stream, I was sitting at the same kitchen table. The same room. But I wasn't the same woman. My wedding ring was gone. The documents were gone. The fear was gone. For the first time in years, the house felt quiet. Not empty. Quiet. There is a difference. I thought about the woman I had been that Friday afternoon. She had watched her husband get engaged to another woman on Facebook. She had sat there believing her entire life had been stolen in a single moment. But it hadn't. Daniel hadn't stolen 14 years from me. He had lied about them. There is a difference. Those 14 years gave me Sophie. They gave me memories that belonged to me regardless of what Daniel did with his. They taught me what I could survive. And they taught me something I wish I had understood sooner. Trust isn't knowing someone will never hurt you. Trust is knowing that when they do, you will still know who you are. The Facebook Live was the moment I discovered Daniel's secret. But it wasn't the moment my marriage ended. My marriage had ended years earlier. It ended the first time Daniel decided that I didn't deserve the truth. It ended when he chose another life and expected me to quietly support it. It ended every time he looked into my eyes and told me he was on a business trip while he was somewhere else. The live stream simply turned the lights on, and once I could finally see the truth, I couldn't unsee it. Daniel had spent 8 years building a life he thought he could control. He had another woman, another child, another house, another bank account, another future. And he had carefully prepared a story in case I ever found out. But there was one thing he never planned for, me finding out before he was ready. He thought the hardest part would be convincing me to believe his lies. He was wrong. The hardest part was convincing himself that I would never discover them. Because the woman he thought would spend her life trusting him was the same woman who eventually found every lie. And when I finally walked away, I didn't take revenge. I didn't destroy his life. I simply stopped helping him build it. And sometimes, that is the most powerful thing you can do. Not to destroy the life someone built without you. Just to stop carrying it for them. Daniel didn't just choose another woman. He chose another family, another house, another future. And for 8 years, he expected me to keep paying for all of it. He thought I would stay because I had loved him for 14 years. He forgot something. Love may explain why you stay, but it doesn't explain why you should. And when I finally understood that, walking away was the easiest decision I had ever made.